Hi to everyone who is tuning in to this Future of Diversity event today. Thank you for tuning in, and especially thanks for tuning into this panel in which we're going to be talking about Gen Z, the role that generation is playing when it comes to changing the narrative around racism, prejudice, diversity and inclusion, and how brands need to change in order to effectively engage this generation and why they should even care or want to. My name is Michaela Jefferson. I am news editor at Mediatel News, and I'm very pleased to be joined by these four excellent panelists I have with me today. First up, Jay Richards, who is founder of Gen Z insight agency Imagen.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Cool. Gen Kobayashi, Chief Strategy Officer at Engine Creative.
Hello, thanks for having me.
Lisa Goodchild, founder and CEO at digital marketing agency and consultancy Digiwoo.
Hi, thank you for having me.
And Marvyn Harrison, who is founder of Dope Black Dads, which is a digital safe space for Black fathers and also a popular podcast which aims to change the narrative around Black dads. So yeah, hi Marvyn.
Hi, we're now officially award-winning podcast, so I'm just it's our first ever award, so I'm allowed to say that.
Oh, congratulations. I did that myself. So thank you to all four of you for joining me today. And I want to start, as I always do with the Gen Z panels, by just outlining quickly what exactly Gen Z is, what their defining features are. And Jay, as our resident Gen Z expert, you're probably best placed to give us a really quick overview of that.
Yeah, so firstly, yeah, thanks for having me. And so Gen Z are born between 1995 and 2010. So the youngest are 7 or 8 years old and the oldest are 25. So a lot of brands don't realize that. They think 25, 24, 23-year-olds are actually millennials. They're not, they're Gen Z, which is really, really cool. So main characteristics around them, they are digital natives, which everybody knows. They are advocates for social causes, really into social causes. And the final one is that they're co-creators. They love creating cool things with really, really cool people.
Awesome. Okay. And so generally speaking, I want to talk about what exactly Gen Z's views and social values are and how exactly we know that. Again, how about you? Why don't we start with what your thoughts are on that?
I think as Jay was saying, it's a pretty, I think with all of these names for cohorts of people, they are pretty broad. So just listening to Jay just outline Gen Z just then, I just suddenly realised that my daughter and my son are now my daughter and my son are now Gen Z themselves, which is pretty frightening, to be honest. So weirdly, you're kind of going, I've got some thoughts about, I think, some of the principles that Gen Z hold dear to them and some of the, their beliefs and principles. But I think we have to be careful to distinguish between young Gen Z and older Gen Z, because I don't think my daughter, while she is very kind of outspoken in of herself, I don't think she's yet a social activist as such. But I think I do think when you look at some of the data that I've been reading and hearing about and seeing, I think it's clear that this cohort of people are more active than ever. And when I say active, I don't necessarily mean that like kind of in a sports and exercise way. I mean in kind of almost political and community activism. I think when you look at some of some of the kind of the stats that we've seen, I think something like 30, I think it's 36. Jay may have the details better than I do, but something like 36% of kind of Gen Z people are kind of active within their communities, directly active in their communities, and I think that's the highest. That's double the figures that millennials were at the same time a few years ago. So I think they're definitely more active than ever. I think they're probably more ethically aware than ever. I think I read somewhere that something like 26 or 25% of British Gen Z teenagers are actively avoiding products and brands, specifically related to how those brands and organizations are treating their employees and treating their consumers and the conditions in which those products are being developed. So I think it's a combination of both, not only having a strong sense of ethical kind of moral and then moral compass. I think they're actually putting that behavior into action. And I think when you start to look at some of the trust, and again, I think Jay could probably talk to this in more detail, but some of the trust scores that you're seeing against big business and big government is lower than ever at the moment. And I think that's probably you've got the perfect storm of a low level of trust in big business and big government, and a need and a desire to want to change the communities that they live in for the better. So they feel as though, listen, if we're not being listened to and if we're not seeing action from big business and big government, then we're going to have to take matters into our own hands. So I feel it's like that combination of those three kind of principles feels quite strong within this community.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't know if anyone has anything to add, and maybe more specifically around the sort of diversity conversation we're having today. Jay, how about you?
Yeah. Again, I love everything you were saying, bro. I think it's so, everything you hit the nail on the head, and the percentages you threw out were correct. And I think the interesting thing about Gen Z is, and you see it really, they see the world as one big community. And I think we saw this in the past when folks started flying to other parts of the world, and it was a lot easier to have transport around to fly to other parts of the planet. You started to see there was a real community that started to happen in that era, and barriers started to be break down, because you started to see people, a normal human being. You may live in a completely different part of the world to me, but we both have things in common. And I think now what we're seeing with Gen Z is that to a whole nother level, because now with technology, they can sit in the comfort of their own home and have a real easy conversation with somebody in another part of the planet that they would never meet normally. And I think because of that, and because of gaming, and because of YouTube and TikTok and Instagram and all these platforms that enable young people to see the world as one big community, they then have much more skin in the game when it comes to saying, okay, we need to fight globally for these things. So Black Lives Matter, I may be a white person that lives somewhere that probably doesn't have that many black people, but this is an issue that affects me because I'm part of the global community. I may be somebody that may not be from the LGBTQ plus community, but I have friends in another part of the world that are. And I think it's very much Gen Z are breaking down those barriers of they're seeing everybody on a level playing field. And I think they're such an active generation because they see the world as one big global community. And I think that will continue forward. And I love what Gen was saying about how, yes, 7 and 8 year olds may be wildly different to the 25-year-olds. And I definitely think as they're getting older, what you'll see these 7 or 8 year olds my son's 13, and he brings me up all the time, Dad, don't use plastic straws. Don't do this. And I'm like, all right, chill, man. He's like, we shouldn't use aerosol deodorant. I'm like, relax, dude. Like, it's not that deep. But for him, he's like, it's so important because he's looking at folks like me. He calls me old, but folks like me and folks older, and they're going, you guys have destroyed the planet, and now we've got to try and fix it. And I think very much that they feel like the onus is on them to sort that out. But I think all of this is encompassed in the fact that they see it as a global community.
Marvyn, do you have anything to add to that? Because I know you're coming at this sort of from the parents' perspective.
Yeah, I think what's really interesting is I always see the next generation, and so Gen Z specifically, as an opportunity. And I think there's a really good opportunity for them to create the world that we have failed to create. It's really interesting that when you find slightly more mindful generation of parents, what they're able to infuse in their children and introduce to their children a lot earlier. So my children are growing up on meditation, yoga, fitness every day, mindfulness techniques, breathing, like open to even going places they would never go before. And so all of these things create a connection to nature, or connection to other human beings in a way that unfortunately my generation got a little bit of, but the generation that my mum was raised by got none of. And so moving from this sort of survival mind state as a human being into kind of protecting your space, protecting your protection is different to survival. Survival is just like, I just want to make it to tomorrow, and I have no hope, into the idea of like, actually, I don't feel like this is right. I'm going to protect my mind space, and I'm going to create something off the back of the space that I've now found. And so you're going to see a lot more mindfulness, and this will bleed into how brands need to behave to enroll Gen Z people into a new opportunity, because you can't no longer just market at them. Those days are over. And I think it's really exciting, because what it will mean is that the layers of credibility, of authenticity, will be significantly deeper than it has been historically. And you won't be able to bypass with a shiny sticker campaign of like ocean plastics and feel like that's going to hide the fact that many of your other business practices are unethical. So I really look forward to what's going to be created.
That's a great point. I'm going to come back to brands in a couple of minutes. Before that, Lisa, I wonder what you have to say about, you're obviously a digital expert. Where are you seeing, this generation expressing these views that we've discussed that they have?
Well, we're seeing it massively on social media. So I've got a digital agency, had it for 10 years. And that's where I think this generation have got so much power as well, because they can teach themselves anything. They can go onto the internet. They can have a two-way conversation. This is not like, when we were younger, when brands went, here it is, buy it, take it. There was no way to communicate that back. Whereas now we're like, well, we don't like it. And we're very, these young people are very vocal about saying they don't like it. So I think, amazing platforms like TikTok, as we've all seen during COVID, it's a game changer in terms of creativity as a tool. When these young people go on this tool as well, it empowers them in terms of what they're learning, because they get a timeline, they get filters. So all the time, these young people, these devices, these apps are teaching them things consistently. And as I said, it's not a two-way, it's a two-way conversation, not that, dead end conversation. So I think, as Marvyn and Jay and the rest of the guys were saying, they're creating content now as well. These young people, they can have like 3 million followers in a second. They're bigger than brands, and so they've got the power. And I think they're feeling empowered. And as we all know, the world is one community now. It's not, oh, you're in this country, you're in that country. But yeah, I think it's massively expanding. And yeah, TikTok, I think, is a game changer. Over the next year, we're going to see some really great stuff coming from there.
Great. Jay, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, so I love what Lisa was saying. I think it's especially around TikTok. Obviously, everybody was seen banned in India and potentially banned in the States. And I'm not saying that this led to it, but the fact that via TikTok, Gen Z were able to pre-book 1 million tickets for one of Trump's rallies, and then for nobody to turn up, and for him to have only 6,000 people in the audience. I'm not saying that's playing into the fact that they might want to ban TikTok in the States, but I think that could have a big part in it, because I think, as Lisa was saying a minute ago, I think it's Gen Z realize their power, and they go, oh, I can register for 15 tickets on multiple devices and make sure that nobody turns up to the rally. Perfect. They're taking it into their own hands. And I think as we go forward, and the world begins to change and voting begins to change, all these different things begin to change, I think Gen Z are going to be at the forefront of that with regards to it from a digital perspective.
And so what does this mean then for brands, how they operate, how they advertise? Gen, what do you think?
I think it's weird. I'd say the combination we've had this year has been any political scientist and or historian who's having to write about history right now. This year is it's been unreal, right? And I think off the back of both COVID and off the back of the movement that we're seeing globally, the coordinated movement, the Black Lives Matter movement globally, has meant that actually, I think many brands, I've been calling this a kind of a Ratner moment for many brands, and I think brands are now being called out, and I think the level of transparency and the level of expectation now for brands is bigger than ever. So brand purpose and the notion of brands having a point of view, you know, kind of either a socio-political point of view on the world is not new. It's been around for years, as we know, and some, you know, there's been some heated debate around the relevancy of it and the authenticity of it. But I think now has shone a spotlight on those brands, and I think there is an expectation now. If you really are a brand with purpose, you have to put that into action. If you really do have a belief, you have to turn that into a behavior. And I think those brands are being called out. And I think, you know, I think even positive. I think brands like Nike have been obviously exceptionally vocal in the Black Lives Matter movement from the early days of supporting Colin Kaepernick through to the work that they're doing now. But interestingly, they were called out relatively recently for having a very, very small proportion of black or ethnic minorities on their senior leadership boards. So, you know, even Nike have been called out, and I think quite rightly so. But actually, I think they've responded in a fantastic way. I think Bill Bernbach, the ad man who created DDB, he once said, a principle is not a principle unless it costs you something. And I think that is true now more than ever. And I think Nike's commitment to spending $40 million over the next 4 years in supporting social justice and racial equality movements within the States, but globally, starts to show that business is putting the money where its mouth is, and it's the right thing to do. Even, I don't know if you guys have seen the in the States, DoorDash, which we don't have in the UK, which is basically like a Deliveroo, a food delivery service. But they recently announced a deal with Kiva, which is a business loan company, whereby they are highlighting black-owned restaurant businesses, and they are matching loans that Kiva will be loaning to those black-owned businesses. And I think it's actions like that I think are going to be increasingly more potent, and actually those are the expectation and the demands of consumers today. Especially Gen Z will be looking at this and seeing which of the brands that are coming out of this movement in the best light, and which are being called out for kind of veneer kind of meaningless surface platitudes and ads and communications.
Yeah, absolutely agree with that. Marvyn, I know you've touched on the brand issue already, but I wonder what you think about some of the brand responses since the Black Lives Matter movement kicked back off again. Of that.
It's really been a mixed bag, actually, and Nike is a really good example of. I think it's great that you go out and you spend a day helping Black people out in the community. But if you don't have any in your house, I'm more concerned about that. And I think that's what we're starting to really see. And when the questions are asked, like, where is your senior leadership team? And we go through them and we look at them, and none of them are representative of actually the consumers that are creating your valuation and the culture that ultimately is driving the value of your business. Nike have profited implicitly and directly off of the Black culture and Black experience for pretty much since they launched. Their biggest icon is a Black man. Their biggest ambassadors and partners are Black people. And so it's one of those things where I feel if it's about authentically connecting to change, it's really got to be your whole business, and your whole ethos needs to reflect that. But I don't think that's happening at the pace that it can do and that it should do. And I think there are levels to the graduation of how you support any community that's marginalized. But if you really, really want change, then it's really about, for me, the reflection of leadership. But one additional point in terms of some of the other people looking to review the way that they're working. I think two things. One, relying on your Black staff or your staff that reflect the marginalized group that you're trying to speak to is not the best way to do that. And I think often that is happening way too often, and we're seeing staff taxed. I've had many people in our spaces come to me and say that they don't want to say no to their CEO because it's their CEO, but at the same time, I'm not an expert in comms planning and crisis management because you went out and put a message out about all lives mattering and equality mattering and unity for all people in response to Black lives, and now you're asking us to fix it. That, I think that's hugely problematic, and that is why having people at board level, not just in D&I and not just in HR, but across the organization, is fundamentally important if you want it representative of not only the city that your office is in, but also the customer base and the consumer base that you are speaking to.
Yeah, absolutely. Lisa, I wonder what advice you're giving to your clients at the moment, because you obviously are a digital agency and consultancy. You're and Gen Z, as we've covered, are really active in digital spaces. So, yeah, what are you saying to your clients about this?
Well, our thing is exactly what Marvyn's saying as well. You know, if you haven't got people who understand different cultures, and as we all know, a lot of these big organisations, it's predominantly white old men that are running them. You know, like Coty as a beauty brand. I mean, you know, they only got a woman on board, you know, in the last 10 years. It's hilarious, and that's why these it's failing, you know, people. So I also have a charity as well, and our whole thing is about diversity and inclusion and getting young people from underserved communities into technology. And this is the problem as well, you know. We work with a lot of brands. I'm still the only person in the room, you know, being a white girl, but from a council estate. We haven't even dealt with that. We really need to ensure that our management teams understand what's going on. And it's interesting because I recently set up a petition, and it was to get our government officials to actually, I think all of our governments should have to go and spend 5 weeks on a council estate. Go and really live in that community. Go and actually understand where people are coming from. And as soon as our leaders start understanding what's going on the ground, which, come on, loads of them don't. They have a team that feed them information back. They don't actually live and breathe it. And as soon as we start understanding that, then we'll start seeing movement. And, you know, some of the amazing brands that have made moves over the years, their lived experiences, Fenty, Rihanna. I mean, she's top of her game. Everything that they do is about diversity, is about inclusion. And other brands as well, like Hewlett Packard, they actually have made massive commitment, and Intel as well. They're doing some really good stuff. I think it was in the USA, they were insisting that 40% of their recruited people were Black, you know, women, Latinos. And that's where we have to force the issue now. This is not, oh, let's wait another 100 years for women to get paid or for Black people to actually be seen for their talent. We've been using Black culture, I think, as Marvyn said, in everything we do. You know, Nike, I mean, come on. Okay, yeah, they're donating what? How much is it? 40 million? I think their CEO gets that for the year. Like, come on. How much did Jordan? Jordan just committed 100 million. How can one person commit that amount and then a big brand? It's like, step up, guys, step up. Or I tell you what, they're all going to disappear because I think Gen Z are just not going to have it. So it's exciting. But yeah,
So true.
I'm telling my they've got to step up. Everyone's just
that felt like a battle cry to me. I feel like I was to get up off my seat.
I am.
Jay, what do you think? I think you've got.
Lisa got me excited, man. Like I'm about to start doing something. But I think yeah, I love what we're saying about Gen Z and the thing that we're seeing. So with regards to what Unilever are doing with pulling their budgets, what they're spending with Facebook, and Ben and Jerry's and all these other brands that say, okay, we're going to pull it for the month of for July. Unilever will do it to the end of the year. But the only way that brands are going to shut up and listen is if it affects their pocket. That's the bottom line. Because I could bang the wall drum for the rest of my life talking about how stop just when you get caught out, don't just hire a Black woman as your head of diversity. You actually need to look at your senior leadership, as all the guys have said before. So I'm not going to go into more detail about that. But I think one of the key things I love about Gen Z is, so we had one of our consultants. She sent a brand that she loved to us. She sent this brand over 2 months ago when we asked for some details around them. And then I spoke to her yesterday, and she said, I don't like that brand anymore. And I said, why? And then she actually broke down in a lot of detail about how the brand had embraced this over the last 6 years. And I couldn't believe it. And she was like, I found this out. And she's a white girl from London. She's like, I found this out, straight away stopped using them, 18 years old. And then she also promoted to her friends why she was not engaging with that brand. And what I think is going to start happening is if brands don't start making movements, they're just going to disappear, like Lisa was saying. Gen Z will just go, fine, you don't want to make the movements, we'll just stop spending our money with you and spend it elsewhere. Because what's going to start happening is these smaller startups are going to start appearing, doing what those brands do quicker and better. And then Gen Z will be like, fine, we'll just spend with them. And I think that's what's going to start happening. It's going to take a long time. I'm not talking about this is going to start happening over the next few months. It's going to take years. But I think that those are the only things. It's affecting their pocket is the only way that brands will start to listen. Because to tell the truth, they've got shareholders that they care more about than anybody else. But the moment the shareholders go, hey, the stock has dropped like this, why? And they go, actually, it turns out we're just a horrendously racist company. Then the conversation.
I feel like it's going to happen faster than you identify. I feel like it's happening already. I think if you look at all the influencer-led businesses or the smaller businesses, the aggressive businesses, like even Boohoo, minus this week's notice of some weird dealings that they partnerships that they had. But other than that, you see these businesses popping up incredibly quickly, and people are making that call already. And I think that people like Nike are aware of this spike in interest from other influencers or from other partners. We looked at the Big Baller brand, although it didn't do everything it needed to do, but it set a precedent that it could be done. You could have a sneaker brand in basketball outside of the big 3-4 companies. And now somebody else will just take it and execute it better. And then they won't be in the conversation. They won't be possible to enroll some of the younger generation. We've seen a shift in the high school students going to Black-owned universities and colleges in the US intentionally because they want to fund those institutions. It only takes I think the generation's already started, and I think Nike's next best bet is about how do I enroll that these people will work with me rather than against me. And I think that's what they're going to end up spending most of their money doing in the future.
Well, look, that's a good segue, actually. Oh, Jay, do you want to add something else to that?
Sorry, yeah. Marvyn made a great point, and the bottom line is that's what we do at our business. The entire ethos behind what we do is enabling brands to engage their end user, which is Gen Z, in anything that they do. So it's really crowdsourcing feedback, ideas, and insights from Gen Z, so you can build with them in the room and mitigate all the issues and all the risks that you're facing. I love that point by Marvyn, but sorry, carry on, my bad.
No, I just wanted to say, I think that's a good segue. We've talked a lot about, some of the brands that have got it wrong, some of the brands that have been, inauthentic in their communications in the last few weeks. But let's talk a bit about some brands that got it right. Marvyn, do you have any examples of brands that you've seen that you've been really impressed by?
For me, I liked Pepsi's announcement around. I think it was substantially more money. I think it was 400 million, and I liked how they structured it. And it was focused around what we're going to do internally for our staff, our people, what we're going to do for our business, and that was about changing the suppliers and reviewing the supply chain. And then it was also what we're going to do for our community. And so I think that segmentation is not only clear, it's a substantial amount of money, a ridiculous, much higher amount of money. And I think it's very clear where that money is going to go and almost a timeline. So for me, they were one of the loudest examples. I've seen Netflix put 100 million in Black-owned banks in the US. Again, another incredible example, because the actual where it's almost as if the strategy to change things is about socioeconomic, it is about access to capital. So if you're funding Black banks and you're putting money with Black banks, does a huge amount of work. So it creates a trickle down, which is actually more powerful than some sort of performative action of we're going to hire 40% of Black people. But one of the things is that when companies make those claims about quotas of hiring, you have to actually make sure those people are talented enough. And if the chain from university into employment doesn't allow those people to even be good enough, you can't just hire 40% of people. So it requires a very specific work stream from university all the way into these businesses. And so when there's a 5-year plan to get you into middle management and a 7 to 10 year plan to get you into senior management, that chain needs to be happening authentically. So for me, Netflix and Pepsi were the loudest two and most powerful two. I think a lot of it was quite performative. A lot of it doesn't have any legacy attached to it also. So for me, it's a wait and see for the rest of them.
I would imagine as well that investing in some of these things that are going to change societal structures is going to, really resonate with this generation that we're talking about, because it's their future that ultimately it's going to affect. Again, what do you
just very quickly? Sorry, my view is if you look at it from a business of that size, and you say, where is my market growth going to come from in the next 10, 15 years? And it's not going to come from doing the exact same thing that you've done already. What it's going to be is, how do I empower the people who aren't empowered? And those people are going to create a whole new buying trend, behavioral trend, and consumption trend. And actually, it's actually business sense. It's not even really to do with, even if your heart isn't there, you don't get it. The business sense is, where is the growth going to come from? Investing in those space and listening to those people about what it is that they're asking for a brand like yourself or a product like yourself, you will find significantly more answers in that. And I think it's just, if we can't enroll them on an emotional sense, we need to enroll them on the business sense.
Great. Yeah. Okay, again, super quickly, do you have an example of a brand that you think has done really well?
Yeah, I just on Marvyn. I think it's annoying because Marvyn chose the example. I was going to talk about Pepsi. I think Pepsi though is a great example. The one thing I would say about Pepsi is I'd quite like to see them distance themselves from the Washington Redskins as a brand, because I know they've got strong associations with that as a brand. But I think they've done an incredible job, as you said, transparently laying out a roadmap in that way. I think I don't know if someone, I think Jay may have mentioned it already, but I was going to talk about Patagonia and the North Face, and they're kind of, I suppose they were the original, the first brands to distance themselves from Facebook and make a stand and say, look, we're not going to have our brand anywhere near any hate speech in that sense. So I thought, that move was a powerful one. And as Jay said, brands like Unilever have quickly followed suit, and other brands as well. So I was going to mention those ones.
Great. Okay, Lisa, super quickly, because we've only got a couple of minutes left.
Sorry, mine are the people that were doing it pre this. So, the HPs, the Intels, all of the people stepping up pre this. I've been talking about racism for a long time. I've been ousting people with white-only panels. I recently did it with Brett Hoberman, who's a super, founded lastminute.com. And I said to him, and he really took it badly as well. He didn't quite get it. But I think, we really, really, as well as Marvyn said, we need to think about how we're accepting people. Why do you need a degree in this day and age? You don't need a degree. We've seen that influencers have got millions of followers. They've just set up something in their bedroom. We need to think about the whole process. The education process is a mess, and people who are really talented from different diverse backgrounds are not getting through. And I think that's something big brands need to step up on. Look at apprenticeships, start getting and building relationships with schools in deprived areas where these minorities are, and they'll start getting some super duper talent.
Great. Jay, to just round things off, what brand have you been impressed by?
Well, they've all been mentioned by everybody else, so I'm so sad that I got chosen last. But it's all good. I'm messing. Glossier. So I think Glossier were the first one I saw do it, because they're still, I suppose they're still a startup. I love the fact that they straight away were like, okay, 500K to black-owned beauty businesses, which is in their space, and 500K to black-owned charities. For me, I'm an eternal optimist, but at the moment I feel quite pessimistic about the whole thing. I think the big thing, and all the guys have said it earlier, the big thing for me is just making sure that at decision-making level there are black folks in the room, and what we're doing at Imagen, 35% of our community is black. So anytime we're doing work with a brand, largely it's gonna be black voices and black faces in the room. So, and 65% of our community are female. So for me, that should be the norm across the industry, and I look forward to when it is. But yeah, Glossier is the one that I would choose.
All right, great. That's a great place to end this. Unfortunately, we are out of time, because I could talk to you all about this forever. It's been super interesting for me. I'm sure it's been super interesting for everyone watching. So yeah, just thank you again for joining me for this panel. If you're watching, stick around for the rest of the day. It's absolutely full of amazing content. And yeah, I look forward to speaking with all of you guys sometime soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.